Real Justice, 14 and Sentenced to Death, The Story of Stephen Truscott. Introduction by Douglas Oates. When I was in the 5th grade, a boy in grade 7 at my school was convicted of rape and murder and sentenced to be hanged. His name was Stephen Truscott. I can't imagine what Stephen went through in the 47 years until his name was cleared. I was 11, going on 12 years old that summer. On the night in question, I saw Stephen and Lynn Harper together at a time and a place that should have proved Stephen was innocent. I did what my mother and father had taught me to do. I told the truth. I told it over and over, to police, to a preliminary hearing, and at the trial. In spite of that, the judge and jury decided that I and all the defense witnesses who did not bend to the Crown's theory were involved in a conspiracy and that each witness was a liar. My brother, Alan, and another boy, Gordon Logan, also testified on Stephen's behalf. They were branded liars, too. Karen Dom, then 9 years old, also told police she had seen Stephen and Lynn. She wasn't even called on to testify. Several times, police asked me to change my story. I stuck to what I knew to be the truth. Imagine, then, that in spite of telling the truth, you learn that a guy you know to be innocent has been found guilty and sentenced to hang. Repeat that, to hang. Nothing can prepare you for that shock. Now, 53 years later, I can tell you that it took me a long time to deal with it. For years, I had issues in dealing with authority. My trust in the justice system was shaken. No, worse than shaken, broken. However, others paid attention and persevered. Finally, someone did listen and justice was served. If I had to do it again, I would tell the truth and keep doing so until someone paid attention. Justice is too important to be broken. The sentence. Goderich, Ontario, September 30th, 1959, 10:55 p.m. The judge waited until the jury settled into their seats. The wooden floors and chairs creaked. "Do you find the prisoner at the bar guilty or not guilty?" asked a court official. The jury foreman, rising, said, "We find the defendant guilty as charged," with a plea for mercy. "The prisoner stand up," said the judge. Slowly, a boy rose to his feet. Instead of being in court, he should have been starting the 8th grade. He was 14 years old. The judge looked down at him. "Stephen Murray Truscott, have you anything to say? Why the sentence of this court should not be passed upon you according to law?" "No," Stephen replied. "Stephen Murray Truscott, I have no alternative but to pass the following sentence upon you. The jury has found you guilty after a fair trial. The sentence of this court upon you is that you be taken from here to the place from whence you came, and there be kept in close confinement until Tuesday, the 8th day of December, 1959. And upon that day and date you be taken to the place of execution, and that you be there hanged by the neck until you are dead. And may the Lord have mercy upon your soul." Chapter 1. Lynn Harper is missing. Wednesday, June 10th, 1959, 7:55 a.m. When 14-year-old Stephen Truscott came down for breakfast that morning, sleepy-eyed, he could not have imagined that 3 days later he would face a murder charge. He grabbed a piece of toast his mother had prepared. His 15-year-old brother, Ken, had been up first. Steve hoped Ken had left some cornflakes. Steve was in grade 7 and was the best athlete in his school at the Royal Canadian Air Force Base in Clinton, Ontario, where his father was a warrant officer. A sharp knock sounded on the side door. Stephen's mother, Doris, walked the 2 steps down from the kitchen to the landing and answered the door. She did not recognize the man who stood outside. "I was wondering if your boys had seen Lynn," the man asked. He looked worried and shifted nervously. "Lynn who?" asked Mrs. Truscott. "Lynn Harper." She recognized him now, Lynn's father. Mrs. Truscott had met Mr. Harper once before, several months ago, but did not make the connection right away. On the air base, families and people move in and out often. However, the name was familiar. Lynn was Stephen's classmate. Mrs. Truscott called to her oldest son, Ken, who was on the basement stairs shining his shoes. "Did you see Lynn Harper last night?" Ken didn't even bother to look up. He was in high school and 7th graders meant nothing to him. "No," he replied. In the kitchen, Stephen could hear the exchange. Now his mother turned to him. "Steve?" asked his mother. "Yes, I gave her a lift to number 8 Highway," Steve replied, rummaging for a cereal box. Mrs. Truscott beckoned to Steve to step closer to Mr. Harper. "Come down here." Steve stepped down from the kitchen and faced Mr. Harper with only a screen door between them. Mr. Harper asked again if Steve had seen Lynn. "I gave her a lift to number 8 Highway," Steve repeated. "Where did you give her a lift?" Mr. Harper asked again. "From the school down to the number 8 Highway," Steve replied. This was the 3rd time Mr. Harper had asked the question. To Steve, it appeared that he did not want to accept the answer. The highway was about 1.6 kilometers north of the school on the country road. It was past the railway tracks and over the bridge across the Bayfield River. After an awkward silence, Steve added that he then returned to the bridge where others were playing in the river. From the bridge, he said he saw Lynn hitchhiking and then get into a gray car. Mr. Harper took a deep breath. "Oh my God," he said. He turned and slumped away. He had reason to be frightened. Lynn, 12 years old, had not returned home the night before. Police had been called and the search for a missing person had begun. Everyone at school that morning knew that Lynn Harper was missing. Air Vice Marshal Hugh Campbell's school was a 12-room school on the air base. One-room rural schools were common in 1959. In size, this school matched schools in the suburbs of Toronto. Still, the school was small enough to buzz with the news. In Mr. Edgar's classroom, the empty seat near the teacher's desk drew everyone's attention. Earlier in the school year, Lynn had been moved to a seat near the front of the classroom. She was friendly but talked a lot. Steve sat near the back right-hand corner of the room. A couple of desks away sat his buddy, Arnold Butch George. Across the room sat 13-year-old Jocelyn Godet, a girl with her hair in ringlets. By morning recess, the police had arrived. One by one, students were called to the staff room. Police wanted to talk to anyone who had seen Lynn the previous evening. When it was his turn, Steve told his story to police. He had met Lynn at the school, and near 7:30 p.m. he had given her a ride to the highway. She had been angry with her parents, she told him. They had ridden along the country road over the bridge near the swimming hole. He had crossed the bridge. He had left her at Highway 8. She had been heading to visit ponies at the White House on the highway, a few hundred feet east of where Steve had left her. Stephen said he then returned to the bridge and looked back toward the highway. He had seen a car stop, likely a 1959 Chev, he said, with a yellow license plate or sticker. The car pulled onto the country road from the highway, then pulled back at an angle, still pointing east. From the bridge, 400 meters away, he saw Lynn get into the front seat. Police were obviously very interested in Steve's account of the previous evening. That was no mystery. He had seen her last. Steve did his best to provide details of the ride from the school to the highway. He was helpful, friendly. Those who knew Steve would have expected that. He was the top athlete in his school. Even the younger kids admired him. He was 1.75 meters in height and towered over most of his classmates. Light brown hair, hazel eyes, an infectious smile. It was no wonder girls liked him. He was not an A student, but he was no failure either. He achieved B's and C's, enough to get by. He liked to be active, fishing, swimming, riding his unique 3-speed bike everywhere. When the school football team won the Little Grey Cup the previous fall, Steve was identified by the local paper as the star of the team. At Bob Lawson's farm across the road, he often helped with chores. Others would fool around, Bob Lawson said. But if I were in my welding shop, Steve paid attention. He liked to learn how to do things. At home in his basement that year, Steve had built a go-kart. Instead of the usual axle pivot for steering, he had figured out a way to articulate the steering so each front wheel swiveled together, but independently, like a real car. In their hunt for Lynn, police tried to track down anyone who had been on the country road that evening. The country road to the bridge near the highway was a popular place. A number of people, kids and adults, had walked, biked, and rode along the stretch that night. The heat and humidity, it was an unseasonal 31 degrees Celsius, had sent many to the river to fish, swim, or just find relief. Lynn's parents originally thought she may have hitchhiked. In 1959, hitchhiking was not unusual. It wasn't a smart thing to do and parents discouraged it, but Lynn and many of her friends had hitchhiked before, to town, across the base, to the highway. Lynn had argued with her parents about going swimming in the pool on the base. She had a grandmother in Port Stanley. Her parents told police that perhaps she had fled there in anger. Many 12 to 14-year-olds go missing. Surely Lynn would be like most and show up tired and hungry a day or two later. Wouldn't she?